Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are about to reignite our conversations around children's books with season 3 of the Inspire season. And we're going to just dive right in today. And for our first week, we're going to be talking about the art of storytelling and exploring different narrative techniques. And how we can captivate readers with our wonderful, compelling stories. So there's a whole lot in that we can unpack. It's quite a huge area. I actually Googled it before jumping on for a definition of the art of storytelling. Google really confused me. It went from there's only 2 things that you need to do to 10 things that you need to do, and everything in between. So Google has really confused me. So I'm asking you guys, the art of storytelling. Who do we start with? Let's start with you, Sarah. What can you tell us about? What are your thoughts on that as a creative?
Yeah, it is a minefield. So when we think of storytelling, like we go way back. I remember in my degree, we went back to like medieval times when people were telling stories, and that just shows how, all the different modes that we can get our stories out there. So I think when I first started writing books, I was just, I just want to tell stories. I'm a storyteller. And I just kind of told these stories and I wrote all these words and I had all these ideas in my mind and I just went on and on and on and on and on. And then I suddenly realized that there's this thing out there called the industry, and they've got these really specific rules about how you can tell your stories if you want to be published or if you want to get your stories out there. So it doesn't detract from being able to tell stories, because I think we're all storytellers and we love to do that, and I can have a conversation with somebody and tell a story and make them up and go on and on and on. But actually there is a difference, and that's when these kind of narrative techniques come in. If you want to put your story into a book, into this vehicle, this product, and then get it out there. So I think there is a slight difference. We can all be storytellers, and it's happened for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But I think what we're going to probably talk about more today is about these very specific techniques which help just kind of curve your story to be able to get it into a book, to then be able to get it out there, because that's ultimately now what people are wanting to do. They're wanting to be authors and publish. So I think, yeah, that is a lesson that I learned in the beginning. Don't just write and ramble and get that story out. There is a method to it.
Yeah. Michelle, you're sitting there shaking your head in agreement.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it even goes further back than that. I know the Indigenous communities, especially in the area where I am, talk about our area, and there's places in Brisbane and Sydney as well that are well known for their yarn circles, that since the beginning of Dreamtime that anyone can remember, they were places that people would gather and tell stories. So I think it depends how you define story. So written stories, and specifically like picture books and books for kids, are a very new invention. All storytelling was just oral storytelling. And then you had the likes of the Brothers Grimm, who would go around and capture all of those oral storytelling and put them in a book. Someone figured out they could make money out of it. And so they started going, well, let's, write down all the stories that people have been telling by the fire for ages and ages. And then it was something that adults kind of were the gatekeepers and would read to the kids. And then that developed into the kids reading their own stories. And I really love, like, it's one of those like doom scroll things that I love, actually going deep dive into how what we think of as children's fiction, printed fiction today actually came about, because there were so many things that happened, and it was it was a money-making exercise. So I think, and Sarah's exactly right. Like, everybody's a storyteller. You only have to go to family barbecues at Christmas, and there'll be that one person, if you sit down next to them, and they just won't shut up. Like, they're just telling you story. Doesn't mean they're good at telling stories, but yes, everybody has the capacity to tell a story. And then it's just, what do you think is the best way to tell your story? And that's where, I guess, the definition of art comes into it. So it could be film, TV, picture book, video, animation, whatever you want. And that's why it's so hard to define, because storytelling is so personal, and there's so many different ways to tell a story, that I think if you want to be a storyteller, specifically become good at the art of storytelling, then you need to honor the story and figure out who is the person who needs to hear the story and what's the best way to get it in front of them.
It certainly has become an art form, hasn't it? Holly, you've written like the works I've read of yours, they're quite deep, your characters. I'm just trying to think, how do you captivate their personalities, like thinking about storytelling? How do you do that with your characters when you write?
The majority of mine have been so related to personal stories. And so it's been, they very much have evolved, but it's, I think because they're so close to the heart, I've done so much of the emotional type of writing. And I think just a lot of times it'll be my story, but it's also, I know that the subjects they're stories of so many other people. And a lot of it, as an intuitive empath, I think that's where a lot of it comes from. Like most of the time when I'm writing, I surprise myself all the time when I'm going through that first draft. I'm like, kind of like, who wrote this? It's so, it surprises me all the time.
Yeah.
So I think really it's, it comes from within, but I am definitely drawing on all of those people that have shared their story with me.
Yeah. So you talk about, you captivate the reader because you write from the heart. Josh, you do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I do. But I was thinking about this topic for a little while before we obviously came on. And I was thinking that the art of storytelling, yes, so there's narratives, there's stories, and all those, and that's what most kids' books are based on, which is, a koala gets lost in the forest and needs to go find a friend or something like that. But it's the story that encourages the reader to keep going and to go, what's happening next? What's happening next? Where am I going to go? But the thing is, with my books being nonfiction, people go, oh, well, there's no storyline, there's no narrative arc. And there actually is, because if you look at it, even most nonfiction books that you read, whether it's a self-help one or personal development one or whatever, there's always a point at which there's a starting point and there's an end point. And what happens is that from that in between is a transformation of the reader from the beginning to the end. And so the end point, the reader is a better person for it. So when I look at my kids' books, even like, How to Be a Wonder Hunter or something like that, I start that off with going, oh, life can be pretty boring, pretty mundane. You're picking up dog poo off the lawn, all that sort of stuff. You got to do the dishes. And then by the end of the book, you're an amazing wonder hunter because you've got all these skills along the way. So that ends up being the narrative arc that goes across a nonfiction book. So I think storytelling and narrative and all that is really important across all the different genres.
Yeah, absolutely. Karen, just thinking of your not so much home, but your Foxy picture book, and it very much is that narrative art form.
It is, and I'm afraid when I write, I'm a pantser. I'm not a plotter. So what Sarah said was about how you plan it, and I'm still in the infancy stage where I just get it out, and then I have to keep editing it and refining it and make it have those climaxes, because for me it's about the message first and the story and what I feel, and I can't analyze it or create it to a formula, so I just have to write it. And the bunnies was really about, and then you have to think about when you're writing it too, what is it about? But it's about recognizing your individual talents and then working as a team and combining to solve a problem. That's the ultimate message in there. So, and a lot of the times a children's book will have a surface message and then it'll have a deeper message. And that's the difference between the spoken and the written. And I think written stories evolved because people didn't want things forgotten. So when things could be recorded, storytelling evolved, like Michelle said, to a newer form, and that was a written form. And then they could be passed on, whereas a lot of the time they could have been, when they were verbally told, they could have been changed or forgotten. So I guess the essence is always there of a story, whether it's told or written, but written is more proof. But I think anybody who writes for children writes because they feel like they've got something to share and something to tell, and that's what drives the storytelling. And then how you do it comes about with how you are as a creative. Like, I don't know if Sarah, as a creative, maybe you plan your story arc, or Holly or Josh or Michelle, but I don't plan. I just get the idea and then I've got to shuffle it like cards until I get it right. And it takes a lot of drafting. I know there's probably a more efficient way, but ultimately the story is what calls, and it calls a writer's heart. Anybody who writes has a story heart, and it comes from that, because we all have it. We all have a story heart, and it doesn't mean what we have to say is the most important thing, and it's not like you're trying to teach a lesson. It's just like you feel you need to get it out and create it and share it. And that's why storytelling came about. I don't think it's ego driven. Maybe, I guess you could say we all have a little bit of an ego, but it's more because we just have this thing inside us that says we need to share something. And I think each of you, I can see it shine out of you. Like, each of you are so powerful in your own right with how you share your stories. And Michelle's taken on lots of different forms now because she does the videos and the books, and it all combines, but it's all storytelling. And Sarah's doing storytelling, not just her stories, but she's helping other people do theirs. And then Holly's trying to empower people, and she's so empathetic that comes out. And Josh, you're empathetic and you want to help kids, and you're trying to think of it, well, how do I do that without being didactic? How do I do that so it's natural and beautiful? Because the worst thing you can do is try and say, you need to do this, and this is the way, nobody's going to open any book like that. So it's got to just flow and be free and easy somehow. And that's the magic of it. But getting it to that stage is like, it's a lot of work. But
there's also some fundamentals, I guess, in the art of storytelling, that every story's got to have a beginning, middle, and an end. there's got to be some crisis or some thing that happens within the story that the character has to overcome, or a challenge or something, and then there's the resolution, and then everyone's, you know, relatively happy in the end. So I think that as a basic idea, as a structure, I think that's universal and goes across every medium, whether it's TV, whether it's kids' books or whatever. And I think when people are writing their book, because I see a lot of people who go, I've written a kid's book and it's about, you know, this, and this, and I go, okay, well, you know, is there a challenge that the character has to overcome? Is there a great resolution? And they go, no, it's just about the little crow that goes on to an adventure. I go, okay, you want to make it a little bit more engaging. I mean, am I right here, or am I just sort of making this up?
But also
Yeah.
taking the reader on the journey and with you in the story, and protagonist needs to change from the beginning to the end. If there's no change, what does the reader get out of it? Like, got to be something. There's got to be, you know.
So I think if there's anyone who's thinking about writing a kid's book, they've got to keep that in mind. What is this story arc? What is the change that's going to happen to the character? Or what are the elements that are going to cause that to happen? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so important. And I was just thinking, actually, as we're talking, I'm thinking about what motivates me, and, you know, as we do, and I'm thinking, you know, I think at the moment for me, there's 3 ways that I'm storytelling. So I'm writing my own books like everybody else and trying to get those published. And when I write my own book, it's just from a story that I really want to tell, and it will normally mean something to me, or it's something that's I'm affected by, and I just put, you know, my heart into getting this story out there. That often needs a lot of editing when it goes to my agent, because I have just, you know, as you said, Karen, I've not really planned the outline of how it's going to go. I've just written it. And then I freelance for some publishers, and I can tell you that's really specific. So they'll say to me, this is the theme, this is the word count, this is, you know, so all these technicalities suddenly come in, and that changes everything. So then I start trying to place this onto a story arc and make sure that I hit that climax, and I've got the rise in action and all this going on. I'm really aware of what type of house they are and what their other books are like, and that word count, and that they'll even say, you know, this is obviously the page count, this is the layout that we're thinking of. So that's really, really specific. And then I ghostwrite picture books for other people, and that's the complete opposite, because they literally, as you just said, Josh, they just have this idea, and they don't obviously at this point, which is where I was as well, have an understanding of all these creative features that we have to put in, you know, the character having to, you know, change and evolve, the page turners, the climax, that, you know, all of this, there is a word count as well. So I'm just given this idea, and I have to kind of sort through that. So I kind of like 3 different ways of storytelling, but it does come back to, I think, if we're going to write a book and we want that book published, because obviously people who are listening today, they're listening because they want to hear those little nuggets. Okay, how do I get my story out there? Or if you really want to get it out there in like a picture book form, or, you know, a children's book, then there are these certain creative features and narratives that this story has to include. And as we've spoken about today, you know, that character has to grow, and the reader, it transfers to them. So that's ultimately them growing throughout the story as well. You know, that there has to be this kind of ending which would bring resolution, solution. We've got that start, we've got that finish, and we've got all the bits in the middle where all that action happens. So I would say start talking to authors, like reach out to other authors, ask them their experience, say to them, what is expected from a children's storybook if I want to get it published? Equally, just write stories for yourself, as Karen was saying, because that's also a really nice creative outlet. Just write those stories. If they get, you know, they'll sit there. If they get published, they get published. But I think it's also nice. I've got like a pile of stories that I've just written that I maybe won't even do anything with, but that's equally really, really good for the art as well, I think.
Yeah. And I think you can have a mentor, or you can have a critique group, and things like that, because you may see your story one way, but when someone else looks at it, they don't see it that way at all. But ultimately, you're the driver of the story, because sometimes when you get feedback, you can lose the essence of the story. So you still have to learn to make judgments for yourself. But it is really good to get, well, only when you're ready for it. But if you're first starting to write, I think you should do what Sarah said and just write. And then it takes a long time to get confident. Well, it took me a long time. I'm still not there. I'm still working on that. And to be brave enough to share it with somebody. And then you keep going, and then you get more confident, and you learn more, and you refine. Because when you look at the first thing I would have written to when I started writing now, it's chalk and cheese. It's all growth. If you want to write, you can't expect a first draft to be something great, and you've got to know that it takes time, and it's a slow burn thing to develop your craft. Some people, yes, they're lucky and they get it quick. For me, it's a slow burn. And I just keep doing it because I like it, not for any other reason. Do you know what I mean? And it waxes and it wanes. It's like on, off, on, off. You know, you have your times where you're off, and you think, oh, well, I'll go surfing or something. And then you're back because it calls you back. You know, you can be on game and off game, but I think you just got to do it. And the other thing, if you're going to write, nobody's mentioned it, but like for me, I've got a whole shelf of picture books. I love picture books. That's what I write. So what do you think I read? Picture books. So you've got to read too. And if there are stories there, the stories you like obviously will be a hint as to what sort of writer you're going to be. Because I know I like the thinking stories, the deeper ones. I'm quite quirky, and they call me, and I love reading them. And so that seems to be the sort of stories I like to write, not the funny, humorous ones. So you need to know what you like, and that will develop your.
But Karen, you don't have any fart jokes
show
in
you
your
where to
books.
go, and then you. No, I'm not a fart person with the book.
Only
But then the
celebrities
people who
are
do it,
allowed
do
to
it
write
so-
books about farts.
True. I do have poo jokes in mind, but anyway.
You're a celebrity.
Yeah. Look, Michelle, can I ask you a question? Can I put you on the spot?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Okay.
Yeah, only because as I'm imagining that I'm watching this, I'm just starting out. I know nothing about kids' books. Are you able to give a real world example of one of your books of how the narrative starts out? How the little character, like, you know, so you can show here, it starts out here, it does this, and then this happens. Are you able to give an example?
I am. I'm wondering whether I have a visual prompt, but I don't think I do. So I get ideas from all over the place. So for example, with my new book that's just come out called Ruby's Repair Cafe, I was listening to the ABC radio, and I'd never heard about a repair cafe before, didn't even know what it was. So I was listening to this radio interview, and I thought, oh, that's a cool thing, a repair cafe. And it started bringing back all of these memories of my granddad, who would repair stuff like back in the day where they didn't throw stuff away, that your dishwasher didn't only last for 2 years, and your fridge would keep running and would outlive you. And so because I was driving I couldn't write down any of these ideas. So I was forced to pull over to a coffee shop, forced, I tell you, and grabbed a Medicare docket out of my bag and started scribbling down some ideas, enough for my brain to calm down so I could at least drive home safely. And then I drove home safely and went through this process of having this little seed of a story planted in my head. And I like a lot of people I know, I write in my head before I even touch a piece of paper. So I'm developing a lot of the character, because I'm very character driven, developing the character in my head before I even start writing anything down. And then going for walks, being distracted while I'm cooking dinner, all of those kind of things. And then finally, when I get to a point where I feel like I have enough to put on paper, that's when I'll actually sit down with all of my notes and type something up. And then I'll actually type it up and leave it for a bit, because I'm one of these people that sees words that's not there, that you need to be careful. And, you know, you don't want to be submitting to publishers where you swear that there was like a word there, but then you go back and read it and somebody's taken the word away. So I think it's trusting the process of letting a story develop inside your head, not rushing it, not waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, writing a story and submitting it to a publisher straight away, but really just sitting with it, letting the character develop, letting the story develop, and then obviously having somebody that you trust to read it to give you feedback, preferably not a husband or wife or family member, because that can get nasty. And because you don't really want someone who's too close to you, because they'll either just tell you it's great when it's not, or they'll, like my husband, start thinking that he's, you know, a literary critique champion and make me want to like stab him with my pen. So it's a balance, people. That's what I'm saying. It's a fine balance, but it's really about honoring the story. And I know we've talked about that before, is if you are a storyteller, then you're going to do it whether you almost want to or not, because first of all, you need to make room in your head for boring things like shopping lists and remembering your kids' names. But most of the time, it's just that you need to get this story into the hands of the people who needs it most. And a lot of us are gravitating towards these social impact stories because we know the difference that stories can make, and how picture books are amazing tools. So don't be scared to have that moral. Don't be scared to really lean into that conflict resolution, and use the resources that you have around you to make it the best story that you can be. And did that answer your question at all, Josh, or did I just ramble?
Kind of. It's sort of.
Kind of.
It's sort of. I was hoping.
Yeah,
I was hoping you would get. Well, I know we're running out of time here, but I was hoping
Yeah.
you get one of your books and you go, "Well, this is." Remember the mouse one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and go. Well, the mouse had this problem in the beginning, and then
That's it.
this happened, and then this happened, and then So in that one,
Ruby, yes, Ruby's family owns a repair cafe. A big department store moves right next door to the repair cafe, and people are buying cheap stuff because it's cheaper to buy stuff than it is to repair it. So that's the problem. The solution comes around quite in a weird way, that there's a big storm. There's all of the junk of the old items that they've bought that are piling up behind the town because people are just using things and chucking away. And then a storm comes and pretty much wipes out the convenience store. And Ruby's family repairs the store next door and says, you know, look at all the wonderful things that you can do when you learn how to repair things. And then they work together in the end. So
Okay.
yes, coming up with different and interesting ways, and not always finding this most obvious solution, because kids like to be surprised.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
That is true. And that is the art of storytelling, isn't it? Having that element. It doesn't have to end the way you think it's going to end. You know, there's a whole lot to it. The art of storytelling is huge, and we could talk about it and all its different elements for hours. But unfortunately, we are out of time. So we're going to leave it there. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining me for this conversation. Lots of nuggets once again from everyone, from Holly just writing from the heart, to Sarah who plots, to Karen who doesn't. I guess writing is such a personal thing, isn't it? And storytelling, the way we tell our stories, whether it's written or spoken, is so individual as well. So thank you everyone for joining me, and I look forward to chatting with you for week 2. So bye everyone.